Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's discussion with an all-star panel. I'll introduce them in a minute, but really excited to have this conversation about defense trade, security cooperation, arms transfers, a lot of great issues to get into this morning, and appreciate everyone coming and joining us. As you know, we always start every event here at CSIS by making our standard security announcement that we have a security plan in place. If for any reason we were to need to leave this venue, I would be your security officer and give you further directions about where to go, either out the way you came in or out the back, depending on what might have occurred. But we don't expect that. I think we're going to have a great discussion this morning. I also want to let you know that we do not have any particular sponsorship for this event, so we just want to offer thanks to those who provide general support to CSIS for making it possible for us to host you this morning and to bring you this discussion. Today's topic is obviously a vital one. With the release in the first part of the year, late part of last year, of the National Security Strategy and the National Defense Strategy, the importance of working with partners and allies, strengthening partners and allies, making sure that we have strong relationships around the world to help us carry out and achieve the security objectives that the United States is pursuing is truly vital. It's also, I would note, has been from the very beginning of Secretary Mattis's tenure one of his top key priorities. So it's critical really across the national security enterprise. It's worth noting, something that's been of personal interest to the President, something which I'm sure causes a little bit of excitement from time to time for some of our panelists, because the President has been personally involved in announcing several arms transfers and has taken an interest in the topic. And I think that's all to the good and has really brought something that in the past has maybe been not a focus of attention to the extent it could be to the fore, and also put a tremendous amount of oomph and advocacy behind the U.S. position. It's critical also to industry, something that they are, I think, have been very good about communicating clearly in the last year. I was looking at some figures last night, working on a separate piece that I was writing, and noted that in 2017, the United States had an $86 billion trade surplus in the aerospace and defense sector. So this is truly, as I like to say, one of the all-stars of the U.S. export industry, something that therefore provides a great benefit to the United States, both in terms of economic benefit, but also national security benefit, because it lowers costs to the Department of Defense. When we share systems, get economies of scale, share systems with our allies and partners, and also some of the overhead that industry has is covered by these overseas sales. The current administration has made clear that they are wanting to promote defense trade in a big way and expand it, and are taking steps to do that. We'll hear, I think, a little bit about how that's working from our guests today. Also joining us, my colleague Melissa Dalton, who has been working very hard to look at the foundations that drive defense trade and security cooperation, and I'm looking forward to hearing more on that. I'm going to then wrap up my kind of introductory remarks and let the panel talk to you, because most of you came here to hear them and not me. And I'll just briefly introduce the panel as a whole, and then we'll move into some opening remarks. On the far right, Lieutenant General Charles Hooper, United States Army. He's the Army's senior foreign area officer. He has been working in the area of security cooperation, security assistance, and as a military attaché for the last 16 years, or at least for a 16-year span, probably has interposed some other duties in there as well. He served as a defense attaché and chief of the Office of Military Cooperation at the U.S. Embassy in Cairo, Egypt, and as Director of Strategy Plans and Programs, J5, at U.S. AFRICOM. We're so glad, sir, that you were able to join us this morning, and I know you're returning from overseas travel, so we really appreciate you going the extra mile to join us, despite your incredibly busy schedule. To his left is my colleague, Melissa Dalton, Senior Fellow and Deputy Director of the International Security Program at CSIS and Director of the Cooperative Defense Project. And the Cooperative Defense Project is a research project focused on reinforcing the principled foundations of U.S. defense policy, military operations, and that is looking at research on security cooperation with allies and partners and U.S. defense policy, particularly in the Middle East. And to my immediate right is Mr. Mike Miller, who is the Acting Deputy Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Political and Military Affairs, U.S. Department of State. He's a career civil servant, member of the Senior Executive Service, and joined the Department of State in 1998. He's been serving in the Bureau of Political and Military Affairs since 2009 and has, I think this is not your first acting gig in leadership, so we appreciate the incredible service that you've been giving and been willing to step up as the enterprise has required it. With that, I'd like to turn to General Hooper for your opening comments, sir.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for that nice introduction, and good morning, everyone. It's so good to see all of you here and interest in this very important topic. As I look out in the audience, I see a lot of familiar faces and old friends, and thank you for coming, but I got to say, you have the look of a crowd that just paid $150 for a ticket in Vegas, and you're all looking at me saying this better be good. But thank you all so much for coming. Today, I'd like to address security cooperation's role in the new national security and defense strategies and the role of the Defense Security Cooperation Agency in the current reform efforts of the security cooperation enterprise. I think we would all agree that security cooperation plays a fundamental role in this administration's strategy to achieve national security and defense objectives. The national security strategy directs the use of our diplomatic, economic, and military tools to assist and encourage aspiring partners to modernize, to create a network of states that advance our common interest and values. Secretary Mattis's National Defense Strategy highlights the need for a robust constellation of allies and partners to address the challenges in the current security environment. And as you know, the National Defense Strategy lays out 3 priority lines of effort in which security cooperation plays a role. The first one is rebuilding military readiness. The second one, and the one where I feel that our agency has the most equities, is in strengthening alliances and attracting new partners. And the third is in reforming the department's business practices. And although I think all of us would agree that DSCA plays a principal role in the second priority, we play a role in the first and third priorities as well, and I hope to point that out for you today. With regards to rebuilding military readiness, Secretary Mattis says often, when we pool resources and share responsibilities for our common defense, our security cooperation burden becomes much lighter. And so as we assist our partners in acquiring capabilities and we act together in concert, that lightens the load on the United States. And this, in turn, enables us to focus resources elsewhere. In other words, building our partners' capacities, their readiness to defend themselves or fight with us increases our military readiness. Similarly, the improvement of efforts underway within the security cooperation acquisition and program execution arenas are important components of improving the department's business practices, and we have a role in that as well. We collaborate very closely across the department, but in particular with the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, as you know, Ms. Lord, and DSCA has been analyzing the timelines and milestones associated with the execution of foreign military sales and other practices in order to ensure priorities are being met. Today, in addition to speaking about these issues, our strategy for broad reform, I'm going to talk about the progress that DSCA has made and highlight some of the milestones we've accomplished in recent months. As you know, the Congress has made it very clear the importance of security cooperation and the need to relook at the ways that we conduct business. The reform mandates in the FY17 and FY18 National Defense Authorization Acts, built upon the good work that DSCA has been conducting within the security cooperation community, and gave us further momentum to continue those changes. Our approach to implementing these reforms involves interconnected conditions or factors that address together in order to achieve our end state, an agile system that delivers partner capabilities effectively to advance U.S. national security interest. Our goal, and many of you have heard me say this before, is to reduce the flash to bang time. That is, the time it takes from the identification of a partner requirement to the delivery of a total package capability. The first condition we need to do this is we need a qualified workforce, a workforce that is fully trained, certified, resourced, and managed. The second condition we need is strategic guidance. We must ensure that the guidance across the spectrum of security cooperation programs and activities aligns with U.S. national security interests, foreign policy priorities, and objectives. The next condition, of course, is effective execution, and that's underscored by the two previous conditions. Both a qualified workforce and strategic guidance will enable responsive and innovative processes and authorities supporting more effective and efficient execution of security cooperation. And I will tell you, we're always looking for ways to execute more efficiently and effectively. The pinnacle condition is a full spectrum capability, delivering a capability that to our partners that includes defensive systems, enablers, personnel, strategy, doctrine, plans, and institutional support. So it's not just the system itself. It's all of those other components that I listed that come together to deliver a total capability to our partners. Before I move on to more specific initiatives, I wanted to highlight a few recent milestones that demonstrate the new level of transparency and progress within the security cooperation enterprise. Over the past year, the DSCA team, in conjunction with counterparts in DoD, has worked diligently to develop the framework and mechanisms for delivering the FY 2019 Security Cooperation Consolidated Budget Display to the Congress, as required by the FY 17 NDAA. And I'm pleased to report that this has been delivered to the Congress. This is DoD's first ever summary of 27 security cooperation programs, a significant accomplishment reflecting our progress towards transparency and improvement of our operations. In support of our efforts to build partner capacity, we just submitted packages to the Congress for our counter-narcotics and counter-weapons of mass destruction programs under the new Section 333 of Title 10 U.S. Code. Assessment, Monitoring, and Evaluation, or AM&E, guidance was disseminated in January, and at least one pilot capability document, which we call the Initiative Design Documents, or IDDs, has been developed in each of the geographical combatant commands. And this is terribly important because this is the feedback loop that lets us know if what we're doing is working and if we need to change if it isn't working. Finally, DSCA submitted to Congress last month the first annual report on the Security Cooperation Workforce Development Program. This report included the first ever Security Cooperation Workforce Inventory, an enterprise-wide data call that enables us to better understand the size, composition, and functions of personnel within the security cooperation responsibilities. Now I want to take a few moments to present three priority efforts that we're working on. The first is strategy to capability. Meeting the expectations of the national security and defense strategies will entail a more whole-of-enterprise approach to how we conduct business. It will require DSCA to synthesize demand signals from across a number of places, our partner nations, the White House, of course, and Congress, across the Department of Defense and the interagency, as well as our partners in industry. We must then identify mutually desired capability requirements for our foreign partners by working with those partner nations and the geographical combatant commands. DSCA sits at the nexus of these demand signals, and once a capability is defined, our subject matter experts work to assess available systems and programs to address this full spectrum capability. Additionally, efforts are underway within the security cooperation acquisition and program execution arenas are important components of improving the department's business practices. We're taking a more capabilities-based approach with analysis of potential threats and deliver capabilities to support U.S. partner nation interest. We are institutionalizing a consistent approach on how information is provided and presented with the understanding that no two partner relationships are the same. This process results in a more effective and efficient development of partner capabilities, and this is a methodology that we want to share with the security cooperation enterprise. So we're trying to help our partners understand that if we analyze the threats and use a capability-based approach, we can lay out a more fuller range of options to address the capability gaps that we identify. It is a continuous, delicate balance to address the multitude of priorities, requirements, and interests, while at the same time assuring we remain effective, efficient, and transparent in our process execution. We're building on recent efforts in the Department to institutionalize AM&E processes throughout the security cooperation enterprise, as mandated by the fiscal 17 NDAA, and the Department to develop and execute AME-informed policies, processes, and standards to drive better return on our security cooperation investment, the feedback loop that I talked about. Initially focusing on Section 333 projects and growing to develop capability documents, the IDDs, for implementation of significant security cooperation initiatives, the AM&E program allows DoD to plan for the long term. This enables DoD to measure return on investment and develop indicators of success that facilitate baseline assessments, monitoring, and program-level evaluations. And we've made significant progress in this initiative. As I previously mentioned, planning and AME guidance was disseminated in January, and at least one pilot has been developed in each of the geographical combatant commands. We're now in the process of expanding this effort beyond Section 333 and implementing pilots for a number of other security cooperations initiatives. One of the most fundamental requirements of the FY17 NDAA and directed the Secretary of Defense to establish a Security Cooperation Workforce Development Program to improve the quality and professionalism of the security cooperation workforce. Now, I don't like to talk about professionalism of the workforce because I can tell you they are already professional. And I've been nothing but impressed by the great team and the great people I work with every day. Nevertheless, we're going to work on codifying and certifying this workforce to make them more efficient and effective. Last year, DSCA created a Workforce Development Directorate to focus on these efforts. And among the accomplishments, what we're trying to do is determine the scope of the security cooperation workforce, something we had never done before, create a DoD-wide defense competency assessment tool, and develop revised education and training curriculum and a competency-based certification program. And all of this is relatively new. The first thing we did was identify DoD personnel performing duties related to security cooperation. And believe it or not, we had never done that before. So we initially considered the security cooperation workforce to be around 10,000 people, the majority of which are Title 22 funded. However, since the expanded FY17 NDAA definition of security cooperation workforce includes, and I'm quoting here, other members of the armed forces and civilian employees of the DoD who contribute significantly to the security cooperation programs and activities, when we took that into account, the number of security cooperation workers increased to over 18,000 people worldwide. Now, this sounds like a lot, but when you consider that it includes the implementing agencies, the Army, Navy, Air Force agencies that work for us, our security cooperations personnel worldwide, and the various other personnel in other departments that are focused on security cooperation, it doesn't seem like as much after all. Moving forward, workforce analysis will be a recurring function to ensure the DoD provides training and experience-based opportunities necessary to develop and maintain security cooperations-related competencies in the workforce. This will ensure that the Department has a security cooperation workforce that is improved, certified, and has the capacity in both personnel and skills to properly perform its missions, provides appropriate support to the assessment, planning, monitoring, execution, and evaluation of security cooperation, and finally is assigned in a manner that ensures personnel have the appropriate level of training and experience and are assigned in sufficient numbers to fulfill the requirements for the DoD SC programs and activities. The bottom line with this is this: I'm an Army guy. So if you get the people right, everything else will follow. Okay, so I will tell you that I've made personnel development and human resource development a central vision or a central focus of my theme during my tenure in the agency. You know, people often ask me what is the one thing I learned upon coming out of the field in Egypt and at the COCOMs upon taking charge of DSCA. They ask me, what's the one thing you've learned? And I think the biggest thing I've learned is that the system, which is often criticized, is burdened and deliberate, but it is not broken. It actually functions quite well. And The people in it are hardworking and dedicated and work very hard both to work with our stakeholders within the interagency, our industry partners, as well as our partners overseas. I'd like to highlight that we've executed over $40 billion of security cooperation in 2017, including over $6 billion of cases funded by the State Department's foreign military financing, close to $4 billion in cases funded by defense authorities, and over $32 billion funded by partner nations through foreign military sales. The system's working actually pretty well, but it can always be better, and we work on it to be better. There's 4 things I'd like to leave you with, and they become the values and the vision for the agency. The first one is transparency, okay? We're very proud that the American approach to security cooperation is fairly transparent. Our security assistance manual is online, the procedures are online, and we try to raise the level of information exchanges, not only with our partners overseas, but with our interagency stakeholders and our important relationship with industry. Responsiveness. We've made responsiveness a hallmark of our vision for the agency, responding not only to the needs, queries, and requirements of our foreign partners, which is our primary focus, but also, once again, to our interagency partners and to our industry partners here. Integrity. I'm very proud of the fact that the American approach to security cooperation is uncorruptible and the books are always open. We know in many of our partner nations, the people, there are referendums and they have to make a decision on major purchases, and we're very proud to say that our books are open and we can at any time justify those discussions and deliberations with their partner nation governments. Okay? And finally, commitment. The United States remains committed to our partners. Unlike many of our competitors, I'd say we're not going to abandon you at the point of sale. The United States is going to remain committed in a relationship with you over the long haul. And although the systems have inherent value of their own, the systems also serve as the basis for a long-term human relationship. And that's what we value most. So if you're going to remember anything about what I said, I'd like you to remember, transparency, responsiveness, integrity, and commitment, the hallmarks of DSCA's approach to security cooperation. So thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. And I'd ask Mr. Miller if you could go next.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. I'm pleased to join General Hooper and you and Melissa today for the discussion. At the outset, I should say that the relationship between the Department of Defense and Department of State is exceptionally strong, and I think nowhere stronger than in the relationship between the Political Military Bureau at the State Department, my bureau, and General Hooper's staff at the Defense Security Cooperation Agency. So I have to thank General Hooper sort of right up front for his leadership and for the partnership. I'm going to start a little bit with the strategic overview, then talk a little bit about the Polymill Bureau, and then sort of dig into a couple issues. As General Hooper laid out in his remarks, security cooperation is a critical tool in advancing this administration's national security and foreign policy objectives, and our strategic documents reflect this. General Hooper spoke to the National Defense Strategy, and I'll speak just briefly about the Joint State USAID Strategic Plan, which is our equivalent over at the State Department USAID. The strategic plan lays out the Secretary of State's vision for diplomacy and development over the next 4 years and serves as the base from which we cascade our other plans based on region or function, such as the Joint Regional Strategy, the Integrated Country Strategies, and our annual guidance, which we're about to send out actually for fiscal 20, out to posts and to the Department of Defense. The strategy sets out 4 priority goals and underlying objectives relevant to the current environment. The first is protect America's security at home and abroad. The second is to renew America's competitive advantage for sustained economic growth and job creation. The third is to promote America's leadership through balanced engagement. And finally, to ensure effectiveness and accountability to the American taxpayer. Effective security cooperation is vital. It's absolutely essential to the achievement of these goals. My bureau, the Bureau of Political Military Affairs, is shaping how we go about that at the department. And I have to say, it is a fact that the State Department's approach to advancing hard power through security cooperation is very much at the forefront of our thinking in this regard. As many of you are aware, the Polymill Bureau at State is responsible for implementing the conventional arms transfer policy, which ensures that U.S. arms transfers are consistent with foreign policy priorities, including regional security, nonproliferation, technology security, and human rights. As General Hooper mentioned, last year in fiscal 17, Political Military Bureau authorized, licensed, and provided oversight to almost $42 billion in government-to-government sales. It's quite a robust year, and I think we're on track for another one this year by early indications. And also $112 billion in direct commercial sales authorizations. That's down from our all-time high in 2012, but considering the 38,000 licenses processed, that's also quite a hefty sum, a hefty number. PM also managed grant security assistance policy and funding through 3 Title X or State Department programs, which amounted to over $7 billion. The Political Military Bureau and the State Department more broadly plays a critical role in overseeing these activities because security assistance and security cooperation are and should be tools of foreign policy. When we transfer a system or capability to a foreign partner, we're affecting regional balances of power, we're sending a clear signal of support, and hopefully establishing relationships that will last for generations. Either they'll be established or maintained. A little bit on process. Each delivery of defense articles and services, as I said, sends a clear message to both our friends and our foes. It's an act of trust and support to our friends and allies and provides them the capabilities they need to defend themselves and to contribute to regional security and stability. At the same time, defense transfers and exports provide significant benefits to the United States, which I think are quite obvious, not only in strengthening our partners and our partnerships, but also in terms of our own military procurement and the health of the U.S. defense industrial base. The current conventional arms transfer policy, which is longstanding, identifies 13 considerations we must consider for each sale or export. These include the appropriateness of the transfer and responding to legitimate U.S. and recipient security needs, human rights considerations, the impact on U.S. capabilities and technological advantage, the degree to which a transfer supports U.S. strategic foreign policy or national security objectives, and how it contributes to allied burden sharing and interoperability with the United States. On General Hooper's point about the system as it relates to the foreign military sales system being burdened, not broken, that's certainly something we agree with. And through our process, through the CAT policy review, as we call it, this generates a case-by-case approach to arms transfer reviews. And the majority of these decisions are actually quite easy to make when we're talking about close allies and partners, treaty allies and the like. Those go through the interagency process quite quickly and efficiently. In some cases, certain key considerations like the ones I've just laid out for everyone, those may slow or at times preclude the approval of a transfer or program. When this happens, I would argue this is a sign that the system is in fact working as designed, as put in law by our Congress and the Arms Export Control Act, that we make sure that we are doing the careful consideration that is needed for these important transfers, sales. A couple words on regulatory reform, which is everyone's favorite subject, I'm sure. We recognize that there's still room to improve the process as it relates to arms transfers across the board. I'll speak most primarily about direct commercial sales. Since 2009, as most of you who are watching this space will be aware, we've been engaged in a process of regulatory reform on the export control system. Through this process, we have limited U.S. government, and in keeping with the fact that we have limited U.S. government resources, we are focusing those resources on the most sensitive items in technology, in order that we can bolster the competitive U.S. manufacturing and technology sectors by removing overly onerous regulations. To date, the interagency has carefully and successfully reviewed 18 of the 21 categories of the United States munitions list to remove outdated regulations, transfer less sensitive items to the Commerce Control List overseen by the Department of Commerce, and to institute a rolling process by which we continuously maintain the USML to ensure that it is in keeping with evolution of technologies as they advance or indeed emerge. I should also note here on security assistance piece, which I know is near and dear to Melissa's heart in particular. Since 2012, we've been, through the Office of Security Assistance, the Department of State have implemented elements of monitoring and evaluation more fulsomely into our grant military assistance as part of an internal process to look holistically at the effectiveness of our programs. This very much mirrors what's going on in the Department of Defense space as well. State is continuing and is committed to continuing this process to assess its effectiveness on our assistance and furthering our foreign policy objectives more broadly. As a general matter, this administration is exploring ways quite robustly to cut red tape, benefit industry, while continuing to protect the U.S. warfighter enhance our foreign partners' capabilities, and secure critical defense technologies. National security, foreign policy, and human rights considerations will remain central to the arms transfer review process, and we will continue to consider the effect of transfers on regional stability as we make these decisions. I should note that we consult regularly with Congress, and we greatly value these consultations on major arms sales, as is required by law, particularly with our State Department's oversight committees, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and the House Committee on Foreign Affairs. What is changing in this administration is that we're putting greater focus on ensuring that decisions are not delayed unnecessarily to the detriment of our partners, and that when a U.S. government decides a sale is in our U.S. national security interest, we will advocate and follow through on that sale as effectively and as robustly as possible. Our policies must ensure that U.S. industry has every appropriate advantage in the global marketplace, while at the same time ensuring that responsible export of arms in keeping with our laws, regulations, and principles. Over the last year, just to touch on a few matters, I should say, we've explored a number of items for innovation, which may also figure into the road ahead, including supporting the U.S. defense industrial base by promoting greater transparency in foreign competitions, by augmenting our trade promotion activities, which unfortunately takes a fair amount of General Hooper's time, looking at how to better support the training of our partners and allies, including in reducing civilian casualties in the conduct of the military operations, examining how we might better build for export as an enterprise, and reviewing what we might seek from Congress in terms of legislative tweaks to existing law. Overall, we're working to remove, as I said, needless impediments that hamper our abilities, the ability of our allies to work with us on common security issues, distance us from our partners, again, unnecessarily, or disadvantage the very industry in the United States that we rely upon for our own technological advantages and the military edge of our partners. So with that, I just want to say thank you and good morning, belatedly, and I look forward to just continuing the discussion in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Melissa.
Great, and delighted to join the panel discussion today. I'm going to keep my remarks fairly short so we can get into some back and forth with the panel as well as with the audience. I want to pick up on this theme of what has been laid out clearly in both the National Security Strategy and the National Defense Strategy, anchoring defense cooperation, security cooperation is a key pillar of U.S. strategy going forward, and what sort of connection that now needs to have to the strategic competition that the United States finds itself in with countries like China and Russia, and to a lesser extent with Iran and North Korea. I think that linkage is incredibly important, and I believe that the government is now wrestling with how to bridge the framing of those two ideas together in policy, plans, and operations, and the connection then to security and defense cooperation. Security cooperation, of course, has been incredibly important for years, for decades really, in bolstering relationships with longstanding allies and partners, in terms of ensuring operational access and interoperability for crisis and contingencies. But in this frame shift to thinking about the connection of defense cooperation and strategic competition, there's a real opportunity to think about how our defense cooperation relationships can be used and leveraged for deterrence around the globe, and arguably perhaps a lower cost way of offsetting gaps in U.S. force posture or risk as we need to shift focus to other parts of the globe. And I know there's a lot of hard work going on in both departments represented here on the panel today to think through those issues. There are also, in the intersection of defense cooperation and policy, some perennial tensions in policy, many of which that have been touched on by my co-panelists, in terms of supporting and building key capabilities in our partners and allies to secure common security objectives being a key policy objective. We've also seen an elevation of what was perhaps a more latent or subtle driver of policy in terms of what this means for the U.S. economy and U.S. jobs, and now manifested in an America First agenda, and what sort of role our defense trade can play in advancing that priority going forward, and how that also interacts with what seems to be a greater emphasis in this administration on asking our allies and partners to do more and what role and what intersection defense cooperation is going to play between the two of those. There could be a role for joint production, research and development, some cost sharing and profits that my colleague Andrew Hunter has done research on as a potential bridging function across those objectives. But I think we're seeing quite clearly those objectives being wrestled with right now in policy. And then, of course, there's the key questions that have plagued policymakers for decades in terms of what happens when the policy choices of our partners do not accord with those of our own, particularly when it comes to choices about their use of force, the proportionate use of force, governance, and human rights concerns. And of course, the United States has substantial oversight and accountability mechanisms in play. But when these conflicts arise in policy, it elevates the importance of shoring those up. And so those tensions are clearly coming into the fore and will need to be further grappled with in the context of what the intersection of defense cooperation and strategic competition on the global stage means, and perhaps elevating some of those objectives over others. And I think that raises the imperative for a strong congressional engagement, strong interagency and robust debate, and clear processes for articulating what outcomes we're trying to achieve with our allies and partners, what are the corresponding objectives, and ensuring we have very robust monitoring and evaluation to actually ensure that we're achieving what we're setting out to do. I want to end on 6 key questions that Andrew and I are hoping to tackle over the next few months to a year. I don't have answers to them today, but they are definitely on our minds as we think through these issues. The first is how to better and clearly link U.S. strategic objectives to targeted defense trade with our allies and partners and across the balance of U.S. foreign policy objectives. The second is what transparency measures are needed for Congress, the U.S. public, defense industry, and our allies and partners on defense trade cooperation as we make these changes. The third is, do defense trade regulations need to be innovated to enable the United States to compete globally in this increasingly strategic competitive environment? The fourth is, what are the avenues for cooperation on the research and development end with our allies and partners? The fifth is how to balance U.S. government preferences for capability and platform development with our allies and partners' preferences for tailored and technical additions to stock platforms. And the final piece is, given that the Department of Defense is receiving increased funding and prioritized by the administration, and it seems that Congress is going to fill that, hopefully, in the coming weeks, that resourcing may not actually go towards the defense cooperation enterprise, given continued strains in readiness and the need to build capacity and capability in our own U.S. forces. So how do we square the circle between what is arguably an elevation of the importance of defense cooperation in our global competition agenda, in asking allies and partners to do more and giving them the capabilities to do so, and in addressing some of the need for innovation and ensuring that we have the workforce and processes to actually execute the higher demand for defense cooperation across the globe if resourcing is not going towards those activities. And that's just on the DoD end. Of course, the State Department has not been as prioritized from a resourcing perspective to this point. So wanted to raise some of those ideas and questions at the forefront and welcome discussion on them. But as I mentioned, Andrew and I hope to dig into these issues in the coming year.
Well, thank you very much, Blessa. And I have, I think, one question I'm going to ask, and I would welcome the whole panel to engage. And if you want to fight it out amongst yourselves, that's great too. That's good entertainment. So there was a lot of threads thrown out there here. I really appreciate the comprehensiveness with which you contemplated your remarks. And I just wanted to touch on the kinds of things that are actually driving this need for change. The need for regulatory reform, the need for a shorter flash to bang cycle. I think several of the initiatives that are going on may have common roots in common strategic priorities and objectives. And, I, of course, am someone who focuses a lot on acquisition, so I spend a lot of time looking at technology. And I look at this problem set and I see that, innovation cycles around the world are accelerating, that commercial technology is becoming more and more prevalent in military usage across a whole range of technologies. Just to mention one, UAVs is a big one. And I'd be interested in your thoughts about how this change in the global security environment that I know is touched on quite heavily in the National Defense Strategy and undoubtedly also in states' strategic thinking, how that's driving the need for change. I know at some level the need for change is because the bosses have said change, but if you could touch on what you see as the strategic imperatives that are driving a need for change in the processes that we're discussing.
Well, it's a very good question, and I wanted to touch on two, and then I'll yield the floor to others. The two are, the first I'd like to talk about is a rapidly evolving security environment. Clearly, the security environment that we are observing every day around the world is evolving fairly rapidly. Threats are evolving fairly rapidly. They reach the point where they are threatening both bilateral and multilateral interests fairly quickly, and so I'd say that is one of the main drivers of the impetus for change. If these security threats are evolving rapidly, we have to have a system that can evolve equally as rapidly to address them. The second one I think is equally obvious, and that is an increase for the United States, and that's an increased level of competition globally from some of our competitors who have been mentioned up here as well, to providing goods and services to our partners. And so we have recognized the need to take a look at our practices and to ensure that those practices are as efficient and effective as they can, so that we may remain and by we I mean the United States, may remain the partner of choice around the world for security cooperation needs and to fulfill the needs of our allies and partners. So there is competition. The competition is keen and aggressive. And so we want to evolve to ensure that we can address that competition. So two things: rapidly evolving security environment and a rising competition.
Thank you. I just touch on a couple of things that mirror what General Hooper said. One, obviously, the technology evolutions are occurring more rapidly, and as you pointed out, in the use of just commercial UAVs by, say, ISIS in that instance. So we need to make sure that as we're looking at regulations that we are constantly turning them over, which is part of what we're doing with the U.S. munitions list, for example, to make sure we're appropriately protecting what needs to be protected, because these changes are happening with quite a bit of speed. Also, there in all our strategic documents, there's the mandate to support our partners, to leverage them, to support them where we can, and to do so appropriately. So that's driving a lot of this, and I know it certainly drives the Department of Defense and us. We hear very regularly from our seniors, because they talk all the time about how we need to provide support to our key partners abroad. Also, costs are not going down. They're certainly going up in terms of procurements, so finding where we can, the ability to burden share technology with partners, joint R&D, and the like. I think that's going to be a growing area of cooperation, certainly. And I think the hallmark of our system, and we have a tremendous defense industry, we have incredible innovation, and we've established these programs, and I particularly mentioned the Foreign Military Sales Program, that truly aims to build lasting capability and build partners and partnerships that will endure. And that is something I would argue that we offer that no one else does. So to the degree that which we can build on those strengths, I think that will serve us well in the years ahead, because it's truly a competitive advantage. So I would say, as resources are available, to Melissa's point, that's the sort of thing we need to reinvest in. So that's what I'd say. Thank you.
The only thing that I would add is to pull out the point on the fact that our allies and partners are actively engaged in current operations with us, and that, of course, heightens the demand to be responsive to their capability and capacity needs as those become quite evident. And I think the other element that's worth drawing out is, there's sort of this dual-edged sword to more transparency, if you will. I am certainly an advocate of transparency, but in terms of the proliferation of information available to our allies and partners in terms of what is available in the marketplace, I think strengthens their ability to engage with us in terms of what they want, in ways that are putting renewed pressure on the system. So I think we, as in the Royal we, the United States, need to be reflective in terms of how we can adapt, while still maintaining, of course, transparency, but to be responsive and to be able to be aware of what inputs our partners are receiving as they make those requirements clear to us.
If I just pull that thread a little bit further, General, you mentioned competition, and there's, to my mind, at least two elements to competition. One is the kind of peer competitor competition that we spend a lot of time thinking about and discussing around here. The second is very prominent in the last few years, in my mind, the extent to which other players in the arms business are becoming competitors in providing security cooperation and military equipment. So, the Japanese have changed their policy so that they are now in a position to export defense articles. There are a range of other countries that have been increasing their ability. South Korea comes to mind. There are many. But the good news, I would say, a lot of these countries are our allies and partners and are engaged in operations with us. So I'd just be interested, I don't know that our system was necessarily designed to kind of seamlessly work in partnership with partners and allies who are also trying to export and maybe in competition with us in individual country competitions. I'd just be interested in your thoughts about how we think through working together in that fashion on the more competitive side of the equation with our allies and partners in defense trade.
Well, and you're absolutely right. And there are several ways to do this. Now, many of you know we have many programs where we've entered into consortiums and cooperation on a number of platforms with our allies and partners and others in order to come to a common understanding, in order to promote a common approach, a common platform and technological approach to the future. The extent to which we work with our allies and partners, even when some of those are also competitors and their arms industries are promoting those things, we have looked for ways to ensure that at the very least we have a common basis for interoperability and working together moving forward. Sometimes we're more or less successful. It all depends upon the platform and the situation. And we certainly recognize it's a natural order of things that many of the nations with whom we have very close relationships have their own arms industries. So we try to cooperate to the extent that we can. And then to the extent that we can't, this cooperation also, and this competition also, and the existence of this competition also pushes us further to provide even better capabilities. I will say one thing about all of those competitors out there, and that is one of the things that I'm very proud of that we offer that many of them are not, either don't have the capacity to offer or perhaps haven't considered offering, is what we call the total package approach. Okay, this ability to provide not only the platform itself, but the institutional training, sustainment training, institution building, through the Ministry of Defense Advisory Program, the Defense Institute Reform Initiative, but a comprehensive approach to providing these systems to our partners, to our allies and partners, that helps to enhance and bring out the very best capabilities of the systems themselves. And that's something that we do offer that no one else, to my knowledge, offers, that long-term relationship and that long-term support of an institutional nature. So while we do try to cooperate in some instances, there's always going to be competition, but it drives you to make your own processes and your own products and your own, those things that we provide even better.
So in a word with peer competitors, we must compete, I think. That's the key. So however we can get at that issue, that's where we need to be. And that's driving a lot of, frankly, to your point, the innovations that are being sought under this administration, and some of which have been underway for a bit longer than that, to see where the way ahead is clear and the sale's been approved, whether we have robust advocacy in place to advance the sale so they will win in competitions, which are increasingly the norm. Where our technology release decisions are arrived at in a reasonable time frame, and again are clear, and where maybe that work can be done in advance, that is done, and that the foreign policy processes need to be run are run throughout, and the engagement between the departments starts from the very beginning, so that where are there issues, they're identified early, and they can be worked through, so that when you get to the point of actually having to compete for the sale, you're not in a situation where things pop up, which they always will, of course. It's a dynamic world. It's not static. So coups happen, changes of government happen, these things occur. But the degree which you can set the path ahead, clearly, that's in our interest. And our security cooperation partners, as you mentioned, many of them are close allies. I mean, we certainly welcome this. This is tremendous. We've been doing this. I look meaningfully at my Commonwealth colleagues over there. We've been doing this with a lot of our partners for a long time. So we know how to do this. With some of our partners who are emerging security cooperation partners, this is really welcome. And I'll say, personally, I've been a part of a number of engagements with them to talk about how they do this work, what our best practices are, what they could humbly, learn from us in the conduct of this work, because it's not necessarily self-evident how to provide these. So not only in their security assistance, but also for these emerging defense exporters. I would call out the Defense Technology Security Administration and the work that they do abroad, meeting with these partners and helping them to develop credible and appropriate defense export systems, so that they themselves are making the sorts of decisions and have the sorts of discussions internally that we do, so that they're making sound defense exports. Thank you.
Just very briefly, I want to draw out a point that Mike made in terms of the definition up front with the partner in terms of what the requirement actually is, what their expectations are. I think if we invest a little bit more time up front in defining that requirement, and there's always that pull and tug with the partner in terms of talking about capability rather than the specific equipment or platform that they want, and that introduces perhaps an element of competition with a competitor that maybe is just offering the equipment. But the more time that we can spend up front, I think that over time the partner will realize that we're truly going to be able to deliver what it is that they need, and on what timeline they need. And so that extra investment up front, I think, can have tremendous payoffs.
Well, thank you for those responses. I haven't left you much time, but I'd like to open up to audience questions. If you have a question, please raise your hands, and we'll bring a mic to you. Let us know who you are and ask a brief question. We'll start here.
Hello, sir. Hello, General Hooper. My question is kind of the opposite of yours. You asked about how do we deal with competition with our partners. My question is about how do we deal with partnership with some of our competitors. My name is Major Carl Corbin. I'm from the National Defense University, and I'm a China FAO as well. And some of our competitors, such as China, have common interest in stability and security in South and Central Asia. Is our security cooperation able to deal with that potential to help change that area, especially as it becomes more clear that military solutions might not be the answer? If so, how can we, by military solutions not being the answer, I mean economic growth and stability in those natures, how can our security cooperation leverage China's interest in that region, China's investment in that region, without sacrificing some of our other interests?
Well, I would say that the whole goal of our security cooperation enterprise is to enhance peace and stability across the world, and I think we would all agree that peace and stability in Southeast Asia or anywhere else in the world is of common interest to certainly our allies and partners, and perhaps some of our competitors as well. And so the extent to which we can provide articles and services to many of the countries in Southeast Asia or anywhere else that allow them to defend their interests and address common challenges and common threats, it helps to enhance that peace and stability that all members in Southeast Asia or anywhere else in the world would benefit from. Certainly, I think we would agree that China has benefited from the peace and stability that's been evident in the Asia-Pacific region for quite some time. That peace and stability has been in part enhanced by both the presence of the United States, but also our alliances and our partnerships with many of our partners in that part of the world. So I would say that I'm not sure I quite agree with the premise of your question that we're leveraging, but certainly that peace and stability that's provided by our relationships out there, everyone has benefited from it, and we hope would continue to benefit from it.
Good morning, Remy Nathan, AIA. When we talk about defense trade, foreign military sales, direct commercial sales, I think a lot of times in the public narrative, there are two conclusions that people make coming off of the record numbers that happen year after year in recent years that I find particularly troubling. One is that record sales mean that there's no room for the system to improve. I think the panel has already discussed the fact that there's always room for improvement, certainly with the challenges of the security environment. The other observation that I think is often made is record sales in some way, whether you're talking about previous administration, current administration, somehow record sales imply that there's a lack of rigor in the review process when it comes to the consistency of these sales with American values, American foreign policy, human rights concerns, and the like. Would like the panel to perhaps address that particular observation and challenge it or agree with it if they choose to.
Thanks, Remy. Yeah, at times I have the same question, because you look at these sales numbers and they look very robust, and we're very pleased with that because, again, we're supporting our partners and allies. I think I would certainly second your comments that we're still very much seized with the idea that the various programs and regulations we have in place do need to improve. They do need to evolve. It is an increasingly competitive world in this space. I think some individuals will look at defense exports and say we're already dominant, we're at 37% or whatever it is, and the number of jobs created, and there's no room for improvement. But I mean, those advantages are perishable in an environment like this. So there is a need to reinvest, both in terms of our thinking, but obviously in our actual material investments as well. And I can certainly assert that the rigor still remains in place. Case-by-case review as it comes to arms transfers. Again, every single arms transfer, whether it be direct commercial sale or foreign military sale, comes to the Department of State. Every single one of them is reviewed against the conventional arms transfer policy and other policies in place via the South Asia strategy or whatever else it may be by experts. And this will continue, and it is necessary. It can be efficient at times, but oftentimes it can be a drawn-out process when the way ahead is complicated. So it's an essential part of the way that we do this business, and it will continue. Thank you.
No, and Remy, take your point. Of course, we've had these conversations many times, and I'd like to agree with Mike. I think that the system still remains deliberate and rigorous because at the end of the day, these decisions certainly have serious and significant economic implications. But at the end of the day, they are policy decisions. And so there needs to be in place a rigorous and due diligence process to ensure that we're making policy decisions that serve the overall interest of the United States and the economic interest as well, because economics is a significant component of our comprehensive national power. As Mike had said, we can always look for efficiencies and effectiveness to be implemented in the system. And as we move forward and as things are changing, we rethink the paradigms that the fundamental system is based upon. You know, I mean, this is not written in stone. We created these systems and paradigms, and we can change them to accommodate a rapidly evolving environment. But to Mike's point, I think that the rigor still exists in the system. I think it's necessary to ensure that we make decisions that serve not only the short and midterm interest of the United States, but the long-term interest of the United States.
Couldn't agree more. I think the room for improvement lies in the planning process, again, back to the requirement definition, but also the context into which we're inserting our defense cooperation activities and understanding those short and long-term interests and trade-offs. But then also the monitoring and evaluation piece. And as General Hooper rightly laid out, and I know there are also efforts at the State Department, they're underway, but need to be built upon, and really developing those feedback loops to ensure that we're getting the return on investment, not just in terms of our dollars, but in terms of our policy priorities.
Well, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we've come to the end of our time, and I apologize for those whose questions we couldn't get in. I do want to thank those who asked questions for asking questions that were more interesting than mine. And I want to be respectful of everyone's time, both yours and our guests who have other places to be very shortly. So thank you very much for coming. Selfishly, I do want to let you know that CSIS recently released a report that is relevant, cooperating with partners and allies on the National Technology Industrial Base. I commend to you. Also keep your eyes peeled for the summary of a conference we did in the early winter with the South Korean Ministry of their acquisition ministry that also gets at some of these issues. And once again, thank you for coming, and please join me in thanking our panelists.